Hi, my name is Mark Levitt, and I'm going to continue reading A Triunistic Model of Reality. We're going to continue with section 4, titled As. Okay, so I will start with how I see the experience of individuality as a crease or a fold of sorts, very much like a vortex or a black hole. In this crease, these moments that I'm talking about, they collect as memories. The Buddhists refer to these moments as siddhas, and the entire collection of them is what we refer to as our individual lives. I would like to illustrate the similarity between aware space, self-contracting due to the sheer magnetic attraction to itself, and the scientific model of a black hole. What creates a black hole is likewise this very same dynamic of self-contracting or collapsing within itself. So visually, space could be represented by the spatial grid that is being bent. And awareness would represent the active tension that creates this bend or contraction in space, resulting in the imploding in on itself, which in turn creates the appearance of a black hole or vortex, or in our case, individuated awareness. Another similarity between the emergent black hole and the emergent individualized awareness comes from a relatively new understanding of black holes. Just as I detailed in book 1 of this trilogy, that the world is in actuality a singularity on a 2D flat screen appearing as a 3D holographic image. Similarly, the information in a black hole is now understood to actually be a singularity on a 2-dimensional flat sheet appearing as a 3D holographic image. I actually studied astronomy and black holes in college, but the scientific understanding has evolved significantly since then. And if I would have known what they know now about black holes when I wrote the first book, then I would have made a lot of comparisons between the black hole and my final vision that detailed our actual architecture as aware space. Let me repeat that again. Then I would have made a lot of comparisons between the black hole and my final vision that detailed our actual architecture as aware space experiencing individuated consciousness. So that's actually what the black hole is. So basically, that's all there is awareness, and awareness contracted in on itself to experiencing itself looks like what the physicists call the black hole, the death of a star. Okay, the first thing that caught my attention about the new understanding of black holes is that the information in the black hole exists in 2 places at once. First, it exists as a singularity on a 2D flat sheet. And secondly, it simultaneously exists as a 3D holographic image. You could not give a better description about our whole entire lives are playing out right now. As we also exist as the singular while simultaneously existing as apparent 3D holographic images that we take to be the actual reality. Furthermore, when we live in illusion regarding the experience of time in the apparent 3D holographic world, the experience of the singular 2D world is atemporal or timeless, where I have seen for myself that the end has already happened, despite our persistent sense that we need to catch up to our future. Time only operates in association with the consciousness that we are solely identified with. But we could all experience timelessness by simply foregoing our attachment with the unbroken stream of identification that quietly operates just under the surface. While meditating, I would often get experiences that, for the lack of a better word, I will refer to as timeless. But I only use that word because my experience of time was distorted like a funnel. Our everyday perspective of time is like the top of an upside-down triangle, where we experience time as being in the middle of a long sense of the future being in front of us and a sense of history being behind us. But in the deep stillness of meditation, all of us could allow our minds to descend this upside down triangle as if we were sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And what I mean by that is I drew this caption so you could refer to it as a funnel. So in our everyday experience, as we experience ourselves as individual beings in time, we feel a sense of future in front of us and a feel of past behind us. We're right in the center. So we feel like we're here in the center with the sense of potential future in the front of us and the sense of a historical past behind us. And what I was saying is, as you meditate, your sense of time dissipates. As your sense of time dissipates, the center that seems like there's less so much of a future and a past, to the point where it all comes down to a singularity. As we ascend down the funnel, okay, so I'll hold this up while I'm reading that. As we descend down the funnel from the 3D holographic appearance to the singularity at the root bottom, our senses of time gets more and more contracted, but the information from the 3D hologram remains the same at the level of the singularity. So by the time that you descend all the way from the top, where you have all this sense of time before in front of you, by the time you descend down to the root bottom of the funnel, which is the point of the singularity, all of time is experienced as having already happened. What I mean when I say that the information from the 3D hologram remains the same at the level of the singularity could be better communicated to you if you imagine painting a greatly detailed scene across the entire surface of an open accordion. Now just imagine, as you sink down the funnel that I was describing, the fully opened accordion that is now covered in this painted scenery begins to contract as you contract down the funnel. So what I'm saying is just imagine drawing a picture across an accordion, taking an accordion, pulling it out to its complete length, and drawing a picture across the length of that accordion. Now, what I'm saying is, as you meditate and you descend down the funnel, it's like the accordion is closing. All the information is still there. Everything that was painted on that scene, all the information is still there. It's just getting folded and contracted as you descend down to the point of the singularity. Okay, so now we continue. And my point is that as the accordion contracts, all of the painted scenery remains. Even when the accordion completely closes to a singularity, all of the scenery that was painted up there is still there, despite the folding that contracted it to the point of the singularity. This is exactly what I mean when I say that our entire lives have already happened from the perspective of the singularity at the bottom of the funnel. But from the individual perspective, we are experiencing everything stretched out at the top of the funnel. It may seem logical that at the level of the singularity, one would experience all of the information at once, and perhaps I did, But I would not describe my personal experiences of timeless as having experiencing everything all at once, because none of these experiences of the singularity reflected any of the specifics about the past or future. So even though I could say I saw that the future was done, that the future already happened, I couldn't tell you anything specifically about what I was seeing in the future, or nor could I tell you anything specifically about what I was seeing in the past. It's just everything happening at once. Okay. Instead, it was just an experience, or more correctly, a specific perspective that replaced my normal sense of the passage of time with a sense of suspended animation that is coupled with an acute sense that the end has already happened. Or to put it more accurate to how it actually feels, you could say that it is like all of the boundaries of our existence falling away to leave our very sense of being to be so boundless that it encompasses all of time. Another word that really impressed me when I was listening to physicists describe our evolved understanding of a black holes is the word smeared. They used the word smeared to describe how the information exists as a singularity, as a 2D flat sheet. And I am sure that I also used that word in book 1 at least once, because for years, that is how I saw my everyday reality. At the very peak of my very intense seeking phase of life, I would actually describe the familiar world that we all know as a bunch of smeared colors and shapes on a screen. I was no longer interested in the meaning that these colors and shapes once held for me. I just couldn't get past it all being one big smear of ever-changing colored shapes. Another way to describe this particular perception of the world is to see everything as being fused together as one continuum, as if the entire world is literally one ball of wax or one blanket that could be shaped into anything from the Grand Canyon to the complex circuitry of the computer you are looking at right now. Although we could detect variances in shapes, all of these supposed varieties are actually a seamless fusion of the one, dancing and moving in such a way to give the appearance of multitudes. I was also impressed to hear the physicists talk about our world appearing as a flat sheet, as this, of course, ties in very neatly with the 360-degree vision that I described in book 1, where I saw that there is nothing behind us and a flat screen in front of us that projects the appearance of our 3D holographic world. But the single most impressive revelation I recently had regarding black holes should not have been a new revelation to me at all. And as I said, if I knew what I know now with regards to black holes, then I would have drawn direct comparisons to my final vision in book 1 with the scientific understanding of black holes. So now let's re-examine the diagram that I designed to communicate that final vision. So this is the diagram that I used to denote the final vision. As you can see in the diagram above, let me line that up good. Okay. All right. As you can see in the diagram above, I was actually describing the very same dynamic of a black hole. When I was describing the process of individualization as I saw it in my final vision, I detailed in book 1 just exactly how I saw reality was/is, created in the first place out of pure nothingness. The takeaway from this realization was how we are all simultaneously the one as pure undifferentiated awareness, and meanwhile also experiencing an apparent individuated isolation in our self-generated vortex of experience that appears identical to the black hole in its architecture. And the reason I say that is I didn't write this, but what I was saying is all there is awareness space from the contraction of itself, similar to the black hole, how it contracts in on itself, it creates this 3D holographic image just like the black hole does. All right, so now we continue to December 24th, 2013, where I write, from a purely materialistic point of view, you could say that we are simply a nervous system experiencing ourself, which is the nervous system. That reminded me of the same dynamic of awareness experiencing itself through duality, or awareness of awareness. The cool part is how the copy always mirrors the original dynamic, seemingly on every level if you go in close enough. In other words, on the ultimate level, there's only awareness experiencing itself as something else. This else is what we refer to as the world, or the outside, the external. So, this imagined world appears to be inhabited by various nervous systems that are also self-generating experiences of itself for itself. And to top it off, this nervous system takes the experiences to be something other than itself. That same dynamic just plays itself out on every level. It is like an endless horizon that recedes away every single time that you try and grasp at it. Awareness takes itself to be something else. When you try and grasp at that otherness, it is completely unrealizable or ungraspable. Then, when you examine the supposed individual that arises from the original hallucination, you find the same dynamic. A nervous system generating its own experience based on a supposed otherness or outside world. The world our brain creates is, even by the most basic scientific standards, just an illusion or appearance based on some supposed real outside world that we amazingly can never actually perceive directly. Instead, mainstream basic science tells us that the entire world that we think we see is actually just copies of something supposedly outside. But no matter how hard we look for any substantiality or realness to anything in the world, including ourselves, we only find the inability to actually grasp anything. Our endless searching for anything graspable predictably results in us thinking it's always just around the spiraling corner if we just keep looking. What I mean by that is, even by the most conservative view of our world, through the lens of a classic physics, we find that the world that we experience is merely an illusion or a reconstruction of a supposed real world. Classic physics tells us that our experience of seeing, hearing, feeling, etc., is actually produced in our minds. According to them, there's an actual outside world, but the way that we experience the outside world is that the information from the outside world interacts with our senses, and our nervous system then recreates a useful experience based on an extremely filtered version of that information. In other words, according to the classical physicist, there is a real world out there, complete with flowers and the whole deal. And when you claim to see or smell a flower, the classical physicist says that what is actually happening is that the information from the actual flower is relayed to your nervous system by either the sun reflecting the image of the flower onto your wet eyeball, which serves as a reflective mirror of the flower. Let me repeat that again. The classical physicist says that what is actually happening is the information from that actual flower is relayed to your nervous system by either the sun reflecting the image of the flower onto your wet eyeball, which serves as a reflective mirror to receive or collect the image of the flower, or the flower could exude its chemically dense pollens that when they interact with your olfactory senses, they're converted to a sense of smell. But in both examples, the sensation, the experience of seeing or smelling is actually taking place in our minds or imagination, rather than the assumed incorrect version of reality where we are all told that what we are seeing, smelling, hearing is somehow out there. So even to the classic physicist who still believes that there is a such thing as out there, he would have to admit to you that with our current level of understanding, all of the actual experiences that we have of seeing, tasting, and feeling of the world takes place in our minds or in our imagination, aware space. Okay, so while we were talking about the brain, I have always been fascinated with the tension of balance in the accumulating and shifting of energies as a tipping point. On a subtle level, all that is taking place in reality is something akin to water finding its own level. On a materialistic level, the brain is supposedly generating thoughts and experiences. Scientists boggle our minds with tales about how thoughts are a result of neural connections. The idea that a neuron firing will determine whether or not you experience this or that thought experience is strange enough, but when you look into what actually determines whether any particular neuron fires or not, you will only find an endless horizon of the same pattern playing itself out on ever subtler levels. And I'm going to read that again because I fumbled my words. All right. Scientists boggle our minds with tales about how our thoughts are a result of neural connections. And what I'm saying is that the idea that a neuron firing will determine whether or not you experience this or that thought is strange enough, but when you actually look into what determines whether any particular neuron does fire or not, you will only find an endless horizon of the same pattern playing itself out on ever subtler levels. And I'm going to walk you through what I mean by that. But it's been a very long time since I've studied this stuff in college. But if my memory serves me correctly, this is the process that determines, or the following that I'm about to describe to you, determines if any particular neuron fires or not. So here's what happens in the process, according to my memory. All right. So first, the neuron lays dormant, full of potential. What determines whether or not that potential is actualized or not, it starts in a little wheel-like compartment inside the neuron. So picture a little spinning wheel with tiny holes in it. These little holes, they lie in wait for tinier particles like potassium or sodium to fill them. Depending upon what fills these little holes and how quick they are filled, that is supposedly what will determine the fate of each neuron. Now, we could go even deeper by looking into what determines which particles actually happen to fill up first and how, but it's just going to be more of the same process. A never-ending horizon of cause and effect always happening just out there, one step away, an endless horizon. So I continue. On April 25th, 2013, I write, as I alluded to earlier, I was contemplating the nature of decisions, which led to contemplating the nature of memories, which led to contemplating the nature of time. I noticed that time was born from and relegated to the mind only. I found that time was simply an experience of the mind that appears simultaneously with the very rising of this active consciousness. In other words, it only takes the slightest duration of consciousness to create the experience of time. And this reminded me of something that I wrote of a long time ago, and it seems to keep coming up, so I wanted to share it. So I wanted to share with you my latest take on this specific insight. All of the events of this last month have served to remind me that my primary function is to find the best way to express that this is it. Or rather, that any experience that has or that can ever occur, whether it be the Bardos, Nirvana, or the Beyond Ananda, will always occur right here in the very same aware space that your computer is appearing in right now. Wherever I look, this truth screams out. It is so apparent that I am finding myself, perhaps foolishly, convinced that the truth is obvious enough to somehow be proven, if just the right words could be crafted ever so carefully. Of course, there is a long history of teachers using no words to transmit the truth, such as the Buddha picking up a flower, a Zen teacher pointing, etc. And now that we've had thousands of years of religious history, and now that we've had thousands of years of religious history to examine, we find it a very common teaching to reduce all of existence down to one word, such as only mind, or only the self, or only awareness, or my favorite, only this, just this. All right, but when we get down to the brass tacks, and actually examine reality, in essence, what we find is appearances in aware space. That's the bottom line. So, while it may be possible to transmit the truth with no words, or even one word, I find it endlessly helpful to start with this fundamental triunistic dynamic of appearances in aware space, and I'll demonstrate why. A simple examination reveals that reality has a base, a path, and a fruit. In other words, what it is, what awareness is, or reality, what awareness or reality, what reality is, what reality does, and the result. So, starting with what is, the very root of our existence is simply inactive space, or capacity. You could say that this is our essence, or what we are. And our function or path is to be actively aware. And the result or fruit of this consciousness is the world of appearances. So, now here is where it gets interesting. After I noticed that time was a byproduct of the mind, I couldn't help but notice a correlation between the triunistic nature of awareness and the triunistic nature of the world that appears in awareness. The world of appearances, manifestation, matter, duality, etc., is a direct result of the activity of aware space. So, just like a child will naturally mirror the same qualities of his parents that created him, the world itself will also mirror the qualities of that which created it. The entire world mirroring the very qualities of that which created it is suggestive that the entire whole of reality could be best described as the original fractal. And the origin point for the original fractal was the inseparability of aware space itself. So what I'm saying is that the entire universe, the entire reality is a fractal, and the origin point of our specific fractal is aware space itself. That is the origin point from which all the rest of the fractal comes from. The resultant emergence of duality from aware space is the continuum that fractals into the mirrored version of the space-time matter continuum. So here we have yet another example of as above, so below. Furthermore, when we examine the nature of matter itself, we find that it also has a triunistic relationship with the very energy that it was created from. In other words, when we examine the base, path, and fruit of matter, we discover that the base equals matter, the path equals the speed of light squared, and the fruit equals energy. In other words, mc squared equals E, or conversely, the more famous E equals mc squared. So, matter is the emergence from the potentiality of energy. In the specific process that transforms the potential into the emergent is the magnetic process of self-contraction, or inverting itself. Or, as it's mathematically stated, the squaring or multiplication of itself. Hence, the c squared of the famous E equals mc squared. Besides the fact that the triunistic dynamic of space, time, and matter perfectly mirrors the original triunity of space consciousness world, I am more impressed that scientists regard the space-time matter continuum just as I see the space consciousness world as a continuum. Anyone can, and does, whether they realize it or not, experience this continuum for themselves, as it is built into the very design of our actual experience. Consider the diagram of the black and white circle. All right. So consider the diagram of the black and white circle as the architecture or design of God/man/world as a triunistic continuum. So basically what we got down here is God, man, world. This is the triunistic continuum. And likewise, let's examine the continuum of space-time matter as the mirror triune within that original triune. So basically, we got aware space folding on itself to create the appearance of duality. Within that duality, this duality is space-time matter. So everything that happens right here is space-time matter, which is a reflection of the original dynamic of original space, original individuated consciousness, and original duality. All right, so directly behind you is the void, the empty space, inactive capacity. This corresponds to the God aspect of the original triune. Directly at the center of your experience, in the fold or the crease, this correlates to the consciousness of the original triune. And the time aspect of the emerged triune, directly in front of you, is the same void or empty space that is directly behind you. But due to the fold or reflexive consciousness, this empty void of potential emerges as the dualistic world in the original triune, and matter with regards to the mirrored triune. Of course, in both the original triune as well as the mirrored triune, we experience all three aspects of reality as a continuum, and therefore as one seamless whole. To make it easier to understand, I will outline the comparison between the original triune and its mirror triune. And before I do, it is important to remind you that space refers to the measurement of the inactive aspects of our observable world, while time refers to the measurable of the active aspects of our observable world. All right, so here we have the four examples of the base, path, and fruit for this one. I list the base, path, and fruit first as inactive awareness as what it is. The path is to be active awareness, and the fruit is the resultant manifest awareness. The base is space, the path is consciousness, and the fruit is appearances. The base is space, the path is time, and the fruit is matter. And matter squared, speed of light squared equals energy, the equals MC squared part. All right, this reminds me of the light spectrum through prism diagram so much. For me, it tells the whole story of the triunistic relationship between the supreme source, man, and the world as a continuum. And so right here, once again, I delineate and show you the comparisons between how the light bending to create the colored spectrum is mirrored with energy, speed of light, and matter, and the source, man, and world, and the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. So when I say that this is it, I mean that literally this is it. The rainbow is actually the white light. Matter is actually energy. The world is actually God. Samsara is actually nirvana, etc., etc. What's also interesting is that the light bending prism is actually the same thing as the speed of light squared, since the bending of light is essentially just light squared. The reason I find this interesting is because I became obsessed with the triunistic model when I realized that all there is awareness. And the very nature of awareness is to be aware. So naturally, this awareness would necessarily become attracted to itself from the sheer power of attraction. This contraction of awareness results in awareness of awareness, or what we call duality, because of the of. In other words, awareness squared. So I suppose the actual equation of reality is space awareness squared equals the world. Actually, this has already been said. In Dzogchen, when it is pointed out that the inseparability of emptiness and clarity result in duality. It is always the union of two that emerge as a third. And the third thing that emerges is always the potential of the first thing. We also see this dynamic playing out in every aspect of nature as well. For example, the butterfly emerges from the cocooning of a caterpillar, or the gravitational field emerges from the bending of space. Similarly, the magnetic field emerges from the union of the north and south poles. The magnetic field itself has its origin in the North Pole, so that would correlate to the base as outlined below. So once again, I'm going to show you the correlation between, what do we have here? The North Pole being the home, the origin designation, the path being the South Pole, and the resultant fruit being the magnetic field. The inseparability of north and south manifest as the magnetic field that we experience. Same thing, the inseparability between space and bending is going to manifest as the gravitational field. The inseparability of the caterpillar cocooning is going to manifest as a butterfly. The inseparability of emptiness and clarity manifests as duality. The inseparability of space awareness squared manifests as the world. The inseparability or the union of male and female result in a newborn. And finally, undifferentiated light refracting from the raindrop appears a rainbow. So the rainbow is the emergent property, the newborn is the emergent property, the world is the emergent property, duality, the butterfly, the gravitational field, the magnetic field. All of these are examples of the emergent property from the inseparability of the base and path. All right, so now we continue. June 4th, 2013. Yeah, every aspect of manifestation is practicing some form of reproduction. That's all that it is capable of. A room of mirrors that are folding to multiply and divide itself in infinite ways. And getting back to my point of as above, so below, just as sex grounds the tension of desire for a while, likewise, the arising of the world temporarily grounds the original tension of awareness, natural inclination to become aware of itself. And this rising and decaying of magnetic attraction to itself plays out infinitely from the cycle of day and night to our heartbeat and everything in between. So, coming back to the idea of as above, so below, it is interesting to note that even an 8th grade science teacher would point out that the world that we see every day does not exist out there, as one would assume, but rather everything that we see is actually appearing inside of our mind's eye, a brain-generated field. So, not only does awareness create the appearance of an outside world within itself, but within that imagined outside world, the outside world still appears inside. Only this time, the outside is appearing inside a brain, which of course is happening inside awareness. Now it's easy to see why the spiral shape seems to show up so often in nature. It is the shape of an elusive magician disappearing at every turn, only to reappear on the other side infinitely. All right. So now we'll continue with February 9th, 2013, where I write, the following is in keeping with our tendency as humans to equate bliss with the dissolution of all memories, including our precious loved ones. And I'm going to stop right here because I probably should have wrote more about this, but the reason I wrote about this was from having a lot of experiences working with patients at the sleep lab. When the patients come in, they're getting their pajamas, they're a lot of times dressed practically naked, and they feel very vulnerable, and therefore they're talking to you in ways that they'll tell you things that they've never told anybody else. And I only know this from them telling me. They'll tell me tons of experiences while I'm hooking them up in their pajamas and getting ready for bed. And after they tell me these experiences, they'll always end by saying, I've never told anybody about this. I've never told anybody about the experience that I just told you. And that would happen quite a bit. Naturally with me, a lot of these conversations were, pretty philosophical. And I was working at a very rural area, farms, no traffic lights in the whole county, very, very rural area. And these farmers, I was impressed when they would tell me about their near-death experiences from surgeries, accidents, heart attacks, different traumas where they had these near-death experiences. They would tell me about them, and almost every time they'd tell me about them, they'd always describe a common trait, which was that they forgot everything. They forgot their kids, their wife, their family. They forgot everything, and it was bliss. It was complete bliss. And I was always impressed that these were very conservative people. I assumed to be Christians from a very, fundamental traditional background, that usually it's associated with thoughts of we're going to reunite in heaven. We're all going to get together back in heaven and dance and celebrate forever in heaven with Jesus and, everybody else that died. So I was impressed to hear that he forgot everybody that he loved and held precious. They said, I forgot about them. And that was blissful. And I was always impressed that these people could equate bliss with the forgetting of everything that you hold precious, all your relationships, all the things that you think are so precious, that in the traditional world, I think people, at least what we talk about every day is, we're going to get to heaven, we're going to get together, we're going to dance, we're going to party, it's going to be wonderful. I was more impressed that this guy was like, nope, I forgot everything. And guess what? It was bliss. I forgot about everybody I knew, and that feeling was total bliss. And that, like I said, that made an impression on me, because I've also had these experiences of seeing that everything melts away like a sandcastle. And that to me was bliss. But me coming from a different background, that didn't surprise me as much as it did with people from a more traditional background. So anyway, I'm writing this with that fresh in my mind of so many people of traditional background saying, I forgot about all of everybody, and that was bliss. Okay. All right. I was helping my wife play with the pugs the other night, which is not unusual. But what was unusual was that Bodhi, the lead pug, was playing with the stuffed animals that are actually used by Jerry or Kaya, the other two pugs. Occasionally, Bodhi will hump the big pink bunny that we keep in the toy pile, but when it comes to playing, he usually only chooses to play with one of his dog friends, Jerry or Toby, the big lab next door. So as it occurs to me that this is a rare event, I had the thought that this may be the last time that I ever see Bodhi play with a stuffed animal like this. No longer than that thought takes to fully form, another thought follows, which is that Bodhi is unlikely to be savoring this moment, as if this may be the last time he ever plays with a stuffed animal in this manner. For him, This is just likely another moment that will soon dissolve into the same abyss as any other moment. From there, my mind wandered into the nature of moments and the alternating silence between each active moment. And that thought took me back to something that was very important a long time ago, but I completely forgot about until now. When I was really fascinated with the whole triunity thing, I used to keep meticulous notes about everywhere I saw the triune in nature, including my own practice of introspection. One particular note of interest was the pulse-like nature of thoughts, the arising and decaying of a thought, followed by a space before the next thought. My practice at one point was to widen that gap before thoughts, and as I did, I noticed something very interesting. If you were to diagram the ebb and flow of your thoughts as a waveform, each active thought would be represented by a single raised wave, while the empty space between each thought would be represented by the flat and bottom out part of the waveform between each raised wave. So the longer that you practice stillness or silence, the longer the amount of time the waveform will be spent in the resting or flat phase of the dynamic. Likewise, the diagram of a very busy mind would reveal more time being spent in the raised portion of the waveform. When I first thought about this, there was no such thing as iPhones, so we all still used video cameras. Depending upon how high quality of a film you were trying to make, you could adjust how many frames were being recorded per second. Obviously, the more frames per second, the more realistic or convincing the film was. The relationship between frames per second and the convincing nature of the film became for me a perfect metaphor for the human experience. The more time spent in thought results in more frames per second, which means a more realistic or convincing experience. In other words, the more time we spent in silence, the lower resolution of the film and the less it will be convincing. So I'm going to go ahead and diagram that. I did that on a video years ago, but I'm not going to assume I'm going to assume nobody's seen that video. So I'm going to diagram it now. What I was saying is that as we watch our minds, we're going to notice that as our minds are inactive, as they're thinking, I'm going to call this the resting part of the wave. As your mind becomes active, a thought, it's going to come up. And as the thought decays, you're going to go back to the space in between thoughts. And yet another thought will spontaneously appear. Maybe this time it's longer for the next thought to appear. My point is that in between these thoughts is the gap. And that meditation, the goal is to gap in that. So then it would look like here's the thought and then, not another thought for down there. So to widen the gap as long as possible. So getting back to the frames per second. Oh yeah, so here's the second point that I got from that. So if you are if you have an active mind and you're very, actively thinking about the world, then your mind will look like this. So it's going to be thought, not much space between the thoughts. Thought. So what I was drawing a comparison between that and the refresh rate or the, how realistic a video is going to look. If you do, so let's say, captions per second. So let's say the video is capturing information. The more information that the video captures, the more realistic it's going to be. So what I was saying is with the old cameras, you could actually set the refresh rate. So if you wanted something to look really vivid and really realistic, you would have it like this. Because look at all that information up there. it's being recorded, you're going to give it a realistic picture. But if you wanted to have, let's say, a longer video, you could sacrifice quality by having longer time but shorter quality, which I guess is the reality. The information would be less. So the video then would be, here's a part, now here's a part. So the video is going to look less real than that one because it's less information. So if you watch a high definition video, it's going to look super real. But if you watch one with less information, it's going to seem less real. So I was trying to draw the analogy between how we experience the world or how we feel the world. If you're thinking a lot, then the world's going to seem very real because you're creating all those thoughts in such a consistent succession that it takes on the quality of feeling real. Whereas if you spend more time in silence, then the world will seem less real because you're spending more of your time in silence. All right. So why is all this relevant now? Well, it just reminds me of my main point about this being it and how everything in and of this world takes on the qualities of the original fractal, of which our world is a reflection of. Aware space contracting within itself from the sheer power of attraction to itself. The original pulse, or the first cause, is this tension caused from awareness being attracted to itself. Since the pulse that this tension creates is nothing other than aware space contracting within itself to form a vortex of experience, i.e. an individual, everything in that vortex of experience will naturally and unavoidably mirror that which parented it, which is the pulsation of aware space. So, that is why when we examine life at its most fundamental level, we only find the same pulsation that created it in the first place. The opening and closing of our heartbeat, or the rising and falling of our brain waves. When scientists measure or otherwise study electricity itself, they reveal an oscillating or pulsating vibration much like the classic Om that mystics find to be the original pulse. Same thing with light. And the beat goes on. All right, now we continue with July 30th, 2013. I write, I have always appreciated the wheel as a metaphor for life as it works on so many levels, especially if you can expand the vision of the wheel to resemble something like a spiraling drill bit, where even though it goes around and around, repeating the same cycle, each turn of the wheel, it grows or revolves an octave higher. But these last couple weeks have taught me another lesson of the turning wheel. As the wheel turns, bringing the new in, it proportionately takes out the old. And as I write this, I realize that this is nothing new. But yet it is obviously new to me on some level, because I don't think I was ever able to fully appreciate this fact until now. As my life is changing with new realities appearing in my scene, old realities are dying off right before my eyes. It is just like a wheel turning to push out the old while simultaneously ushering in the new. Despite appearances, these seemingly unrelated events are inextricably connected by the turning wheel. In a span of about a week, I found out my grandmother, stepfather, and work partner are all dying from Alzheimer's disease, bone cancer, and MS. Even our cat Turia and oldest rescue pug Lila are breaking down health-wise, although they probably will outlive the humans given the cat is still purring and the old pug still lives with that permanent smile beaming brightly. And it is not just the fact that the new content is replacing or transforming into new content in my scenery, but the dying off of the old content will have direct ramifications on the new content in various forms. It's just so obviously all connected that it reminds me of how sometimes reality does not mind being bold to drive a particular point home. Then I continue with July 15th. Okay, so now onto the good stuff. Last week I asked my nephew what dynamic in nature would make a curve asymmetrical versus symmetrical. The conversation led him to telling me about a graph that he uses as a tool for working formulations in his physics class. The graph includes a curve referred to as an asymptote, which is a curve that can never reach the opposite end of the graph, which is a straight line. So as the straight line goes, the curve's bending, so therefore it's never going to reach the end. God knows what these geniuses are using this graph for, but what piqued my interest in this asymptote was the similarity that it shared with Zeno's paradox, or the Buddhist concept of a chimera. The concept of a chimera is that these are beings that disappear as you get close to them. I have long read into that concept that they were talking about, the true nature of all beings. In other words, when I heard about the Buddhist concept of a chimera, that as you approach them, they disappear, I thought they were referring to the nature of all beings. As you approach anything, it disappears. It looks like something is there, but the closer you inspect it, the more you find elusiveness, or at the very most, a never-ending horizon. I like this concept because I see it in all of nature. Scientists are always on the hunt for some solid particle, but for each time they inspect closer, they find that the particle that they thought had solidity was actually just an appearance caused by the movement of smaller aggregated matter. And of course, when they isolate a single speck of that aggregated matter, when they isolate a single speck of the aggregated matter and get closer to examine it, they only find the same dynamic, an illusion caused by the movement of some other apparent matter ad infinitum. You could say the same thing about the search for the self. It is apparently there, but upon closer inspection, you'll find nothing. So let me back up because what I just described is not obvious to everybody. So I want to describe that for people. So let's say at one point we thought the world was made up of atoms. So the whole world was made up of an atom. So we thought there's something substantial, something graspable. It's actually there. Put it on a petri dish and that's the thing that's actually real in itself. What we found out is by inspecting it closer, when you take a closer look, it turns out that the atom is actually just an aggregate of smaller parts spinning around, moving around, creating activity, create the appearance of a solid thing. So you say, okay, well, at least you say there are solid things that are making up the appearance of an atom. So let's look at one of these solid things. So now you say, okay, now we got another solid thing. Wrong. When we look at that solid thing, we inspect it and it turns out to be an aggregate of smaller things spinning around to make that one appear solid. So you say, okay, let's look at one of these small things. It goes on infinitely. Everything you think that is solid, you look closer, it's not. It turns out to just be an aggregate of smaller things spinning around to create the appearance of that supposed actual thing. And what I say, and that's the same thing with the self. You think there's a self, you look for it, it turns out, oh, it's just a collection of all these emotions and memories and feelings and wants and needs. But if you inspect any of those things, it's going to turn out to be wispy. Nothing on every level, no matter where you look. That's the good news, actually. All right. So anyways, I see that dynamic as really the only dynamic that is going on in reality. the same pattern of apparent reality revealing itself to be absence of any actuality. And I can't believe I went through the actual whole first book without saying this, but the longest and most consistent pattern that has been apparent to me throughout my whole journey is the recognition and understanding that it is and it isn't simultaneously. I could go as far as to say that everything that I have ever learned could be distilled down to that one point. Even my diagram of the black and white circle is just a visual representation of it is and it isn't. I want to take just a moment to demonstrate just how and why it is inevitable that this particular dynamic of apparent duality or apparent actuality, or it is and it isn't, is the only dynamic that can ever take place. To do this, I would like to use the black and white circle diagram to illustrate the three dimensions or aspects of nothing, and how the inseparability of these three dimensions of nothing is what gives rise to our world, or any world for that matter, any world that could ever exist. So, we have the first dimension of nothing, which is the black bottom, as that represents the capacity, the unmanifest, or the void. This is the isness of nothing. That's what that represents. So this represents the isness of nothing. The fact sounds contradictory, I get, but welcome to the party. All right. The second dimension of nothing is the fold in the center, as that represents the power, the activity, the tension, the energy, or simply put, the moving aspect of nothing. This is the doing of nothing. The third dimension of nothing is the resultant white top of the circle, as that represents the appearance of duality or separation that naturally arises from the movement of the fold or the second aspect. This is the appearance of nothing. So this is the void still, just appearing as whatever it appears to be. So my point is that even though you have three detailed descriptions and unique aspects of the triune, they were all in fact aspects of nothing. So how can nothing have three unique aspects or dimensions? Well, the first aspect of the triune is being unmanifest, or simply space. So it's easy to see that as nothing or no thing. The second aspect of the triune is an activity rather than something. So that is a slightly more subtle point, because it's still not a thing, it's an action. Running is not a thing. Whatever. And then the third aspect of the triune is the appearance of something. But ultimately, it's just an appearance, and therefore no thing at all. So this is the most subtle form of nothing. The bottom line is that there will always be the appearance of something, even though a closer examination of that something will always reveal nothing. All right, we continue January 14th or February 14th. One of these little side notes, one of these little side points that I discovered on my walk the other morning was that I do not want to talk about the world being an illusion or there being no self, etc. These things may be true on a certain level, but I think that we would actually better advance the discussion by examining the nature of what it means to be illusory. What I mean by that is that when we use the word illusion or the phrase not there, we are drawing a contrast to something that is not illusory or something that is there. So when you come to the point in your spiritual path that you discover that the entire world, including yourself, is merely a trick of the mind, you feel intellectually and even emotionally justified in saying that the world or yourself is merely an illusion. If you are coming from the perspective that you and the world are solid and independent fixed objects, then yeah, when you or the world are properly examined, they will be found to be illusory. But from my current perspective, I would not characterize the world as being either unreal, because that would make me feel like I was saying that there was something else that is real, although the world is not. So basically what I'm saying is, if you're saying that the world's an illusion, then you're saying there's something that's not an illusion. If you're saying something that is real, then you're saying something that's not real. Same thing with the self. Saying that there is no self feels like I'm saying, but there is something that is real. It's just not the self. That just doesn't gel with me intellectually, emotionally, because there's literally nothing on every level. So to specifically go on about there being no world or no self seems to only speak to the ones going through the initial shock of seeing that what they thought was real isn't. Interestingly enough, it does feel right to say that nothing exists. I suppose it's the getting specific part that just doesn't jive with my experience. So what I'm saying there is it feels okay for me to say that nothing exists, but when you get specific by saying you don't exist or the world doesn't exist, it doesn't feel right, because it sounds to me like you're implying that there is something real. There's something else. A long time ago, I wrote about I wrote about how the triune describes three levels or aspects of nothing. So let me go over it again, this time using light as an analogy for awareness. To the left, you have the base. That's what it is, which is pure, undifferentiated white light. That is what I'm designating as nothing. No differentiation. In the center, you have the path, what it does. This is the bending of the light. Still no thing, it's just an action. To the right, you have the fruit, which is what it creates, which is pure, undifferentiated light. Which is pure, undifferentiated light appearing as a rainbow. Still nothing, just an appearance of something. As you can see on every level, there is never anything at all. No thing is nothing. Actions are not anything, and the appearance of things are still no thing. So you have undifferentiated nothing, you have the action, which is still nothing, and you have the appearance, which is still nothing. There is nothing on any level. So to tell someone that something specific doesn't exist seems to be an elementary point at best. Of course, this diagram below, this diagram below, well, now I can't find it, but the diagram below of the famous black and white circle. Of course, this diagram below demonstrates that same triunistic dynamic, but from our literal perspective. And that's the diagram that I'm talking about. So this is the same thing, but this is from a literal perspective. The bottom correlates with the white light. I've already done this before. So the bottom correlates with the white light, representing the pure, undifferentiated awareness. The crease or the fold in the center correlates with the bending of the light, and that represents man, or individualization. And the top correlating with the rainbow represents the world. And more importantly, this diagram below communicates, And more importantly, this diagram below communicates that all three aspects of the triune are actually one. And the diagram that I'm talking about is the bending of the leaf diagram. And what I'm saying there is that when the one bends, it creates the appearance of multiplicity or division or contrast, when in actuality, there is none whatsoever. There is only this. All right, well, thank you very much. I'm going to end with showing you all of the triunes that I used in this chapter. The base path and the fruit. We have, let's see if I can read it. The caterpillar cocooning to create the butterfly. The home of the north, the union of the north and south magnetic poles emerging as the magnetic field. The bending of space to emerge as the gravitational field. The contraction of the star to emerge as the black hole. The contracting of awareness to emerge as a vortex of individuality. Space and consciousness emerging as appearances. Space-time emerging as matter. And then the inseparability of matter and the speed of light squared manifesting as energy. Light bending prism manifesting as the color spectrum. Energy speed of light squared equals matter. God, man equals world. Emptiness, clarity, duality. The space and awareness squared equals the world. Male and female equal newborn. And undifferentiated light and the refraction from the raindrop equal a rainbow, or emerge as a rainbow. So that is it. Thank you very much. And stay tuned next week for my final section titled So. And so will be the conclusions of everything I've said so far. So thanks for being with me, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.